Howdy everyone. So, as you can tell, this is not edible napalm. I am making this video on behalf of Matt, because he was a bit too angry and annoyed to make this video himself. Because BionicDance, in all of her wisdom, decided she wanted to chime in on the whole Boston situation. And as we all know, BionicDance is not the sharpest tool in the shed, and she decided to probably make the stupidest, most irrelevant, and most unnecessary video anyone could have made about this whole thing. Basically, she's trying to say that we can't call what happened in Boston terrorism yet because no one has claimed credit for it, and she thinks that doesn't, since no one has claimed credit for it, it can't possibly meet the definition of terrorism yet. And she wastes about 8 minutes talking about this, based off of, well, her massive amounts of experience and knowledge in this subject, I guess looking up terrorism in her little online dictionary that she favors so much. Kate, all I have to say is that terrorism is a very complex topic, and there are a variety of definitions in there. Maybe if you had spent more than like 2 seconds researching this issue instead of just going to Google and typing define terrorism and reading the first thing that popped up, you might have a better understanding of what's going on. Here's what the FBI says about terrorism. Quote, "There is no single universally accepted definition of terrorism. Terrorism is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations as, quote, the unlawful use of force or violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives." 28 CFR Code of Federal Regulations, Section 0.85. End quote. As an aside, I think that's the primary definition that the online dictionary she uses references. Let's continue with what the FBI says, though. Quote, "The FBI further describes terrorism as either domestic or international, depending on the origin, base, and objectives of the terrorist organization. For the purpose of this report, the FBI will use the following definitions. Domestic terrorism is the unlawful use or threatened use of force or violence by a group or individual based and operating entirely within the United States or Puerto Rico without foreign direction committed against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. International terrorism involves violent acts or acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or any state, or that would be a criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States or any state. These acts appear to be intended to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or affect the conduct of a government by assassination or kidnapping. International terrorist acts occur outside the United States or transcend national boundaries in terms of the means by which they are accomplished, the persons they appear intended to coerce or intimidate, or the locale in which their perpetrators operate or seek asylum." Now, for a non-government definition, I'll break this up before going to some other definitions our government uses. Let's go to what Caleb Carr says in his book, The Lessons of Terror, The History of Warfare Against Civilians, which is a very good book. And he spends a bit of time defining terrorism, and what he says, quote, "This brief book is intended to provide an introduction to the historical roots of modern international terrorism by placing that phenomenon squarely within the discipline of military history rather than political science or sociology. This is not to imply that military history, like all other categories of history, does not encompass strong elements of related disciplines, notably psychology and philosophy. But the essential concern of both political science and sociology is, by definition, the dispassionate and systematic quantification of human behavior. And because war is concerned with and the result of the fiercest human passions, such approaches are of distinctly little use. It will be proposed that what has to date been viewed and treated as a uniquely modern problem is in fact the current stage in a violent evolution whose origins extend as far back as does human conflict itself. Terrorism, in other words, is simply the contemporary name given to and the modern permutation of warfare deliberately waged against civilians with the purpose of destroying their will to support either leaders or policies that the agents of such violence find objectionable." And there are a lot of people who would follow that definition as opposed to the one I just read or the two I'm going to read you now. These definitions are complex, and which is why you can't trust a dictionary when it comes to actually defining these incredibly important terms that we're all still fighting over. There's a reason why the United Nations doesn't have a single definition of terrorism. Keep that in mind. Now let's go to what some other groups say, such as, Title 18 United States Code, Chapter 113, Chapter 113B, Section 2331 says in, I guess this is paragraph 1, The term international terrorism means activities that A, involve violent acts or acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, or that would be a criminal violation if committed within the jurisdiction of the United States or of any state. B, appear to be intended, B1, to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, 2, to influence the population of a government by intimidation or coercion, or 3, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and C, occur primarily outside the territorial jurisdiction of the United States or transcend national boundaries in terms of the means by which they are accomplished, the persons they appear intended to intimidate or coerce, or the locale in which their perpetrators operate or seek asylum. And then going down to part 5, the term domestic terrorism means activities that A, involve acts dangerous to human life that are a violation of the criminal laws of the United States or of any state, B, appear to be intended to 1, to intimidate or coerce a civilian population, 2, to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, or 3, to affect the conduct of a government by mass destruction, assassination, or kidnapping, and C, occur primarily within the territorial jurisdiction of the United States. Now let's go to the definition that the State Department uses, which comes from, what is this? Title 22's United States Code, Chapter 38, Section 2656F, subsection D, paragraph 2. The term terrorism means premeditated, politically motivated violence perpetrated against non-combatant targets by subnational groups or clandestine agents. So there could have been, essentially, we don't have to necessarily know the motivation of the attacks or who carried them out or why they carried them out for them to be terrorism. And since BionicDance seems to think you can't call something terrorism unless someone's officially claimed responsibility for it, well, let's look at it this way. No one has claimed responsibility yet for the 2001 anthrax attacks. We think we know who did it. He's dead, I believe, because he killed himself. We think we know who did it, but no one claimed responsibility for that attack. At least no one seriously claimed responsibility for that attack. I believe no one claimed responsibility for the Cobra Towers attack as well, although we think we know who did it. And right now, well, this actually just happened earlier today. Apparently there were envelopes sent that were filled with ricin poison to Senator Roger Wicker from Mississippi. We don't know who did that yet, and apparently no one's claimed responsibility for that. But I guess until we know who claimed responsibility for it, we can't possibly consider that terrorism in BionicDance's eyes. Now, she says that since we don't know who caused this and no one's claimed responsibility for it, it can't be terrorism by definition. Well, that's really funny, because I guess by that logic, that means that Kate here is saying that she knows more than the State Department. And I'm going to read very briefly from a CRS report, Trends in Terrorism, 2006, written by Raphael Pearl, a specialist in international affairs, the Foreign Affairs, Defense, and Trade Division. And what we're going to read from here real quick, this is from the summary, and then we're going to get to the specific section. Quote, emerging trends that may require enhanced policy focus are 1, attacks that aim to cause economic damage, such as attacks on transportation infrastructure, tourism, and oil installations. 2, the growing number of unattributed terrorist attacks. And 3, the growing power and influence of radical Islamist political parties in foreign nations. Now, going to the report on page 15, I believe this is, of the report, quote, responding to unclaimed/anonymous terrorism. Another potential issue is how to respond to the growing number of terrorist attacks that are unattributed or claimed in a manner in which the true identity of their perpetrators is masked. Such a trend might suggest that increasingly the goal of terrorist attacks is to inflict as much damage on the enemy as possible without linking attacks to specific goals, such as the release of prisoners, and with little importance given to gaining publicity for the specific group inflicting the damage. Terrorists may believe that recruitment and popular support for terrorism will increase after each successful attack, and that it is relatively immaterial for the perpetrating group to publicly identify itself. Moreover, not revealing or masking the real identity of the perpetrating group makes it more difficult for law enforcement or retaliatory operations to effectively target them. In some instances, it may not even be possible to determine if a particular event is an act of terror. For example, is a particular train wreck, an explosion at a chemical plant, a forest fire, an increase in computer viruses, or an outbreak of BSE or West Nile virus the result of negligence, or an act of terror or an act of God. Although there may not yet be sufficient data to confirm such a trend towards anonymous terror attacks, some honed in on the phenomenon of stealth terrorism as early as June of 1991, when it was discussed at a joint American Academy of Science / Russian Academy of Science workshop on high-impact terrorism. More recently, research conducted by the National Journal, which was largely based on State Department data, found that in 2001, about 20% of the attacks in the government's database were not claimed by any terrorist organization. In 2002, it was 40%, in 2003, it was slightly more than half, and in 2004, more than 70% of attacks carried no claim of responsibility. If validated, such a trend would have a direct impact on anti-terror policies, since current doctrines of deterrence of and retaliation for terrorist attacks are predicated on 1. Identifying acts of terrorism, and 2. Identifying those who commit them. So, what we can see here is that unattributed terrorist attacks happen, and they're definitely not uncommon. In several years, they were actually the norm and made up the majority of attacks that the government at least has tracked and recorded. So for Kate to sit here and try and pretend like she has any understanding of the subject and like she has any idea what she's talking about is asinine, and I find it rather ghoulish that she's basically trying to fucking cash in on this and make some quick AdSense revenue, I guess, and opening her mouth and once again flogging her favorite little topic, dictionary definitions, on subjects she knows absolutely nothing about. So let's actually talk. Well, why would a group carry out a terrorist attack and not claim credit for it? Well, the CRS report there gave some pretty good reasons why. Maybe they want to carry out more terrorist attacks in the future, and they think it's in their best interest to not say, hello, everyone, we did this, because, then it makes it more likely that they'll be caught, and thus might not be able to carry out more attacks in the future. There's also the point that, actually, Al-Qaeda's raised before, that even failed terrorist attacks can cause huge economic damages to their targets, namely the United States. Go look how much money we've spent fighting things due to the failed attack with the shoe bomber. Or the, oh god, what was it? The Prat cartridge thing from Yemen. How many millions upon millions of dollars has the United States spent on tightening up security after failed attacks? And so you could very well have a terrorist attack that no one claims credit for, specifically for those reasons, and because they want the United States to spend and waste a lot of money shoring up defenses that can't possibly ever be shored up enough to protect everyone and to prevent all future attacks. Or they could want the United States to draw the wrong conclusions about who is responsible and maybe lash out at a group or a country that had nothing to do with the attacks. There are plenty of reasons why a terrorist group or a terrorist might not claim responsibility for those attacks. So, Kate, before you open your fucking mouth, maybe you should do some fucking research. And I think the idea that you're apparently so childish and pathetic, you can't feel empathy with these people because you don't know anyone there, and you don't know anyone who lives in Boston, and you don't know anyone who was there or whatever. I just find that really telling about your character as a person and your humanity, that you can't empathize with people in that sort of situation. You can't really feel anything about it. And the most important thing you could come up to talk with, you could come up to talk about in a fucking video was, and this doesn't meet the definition of terrorism that I got from this online dictionary and all of my 5 seconds of research on the subject, because I'm BionicDance, and I don't know how to feel about things unless George Lucas told me how to feel about it in Star Wars. Sorry for this rant, everyone. I hope you enjoyed it, unless you're BionicDance, in which case, go fuck yourself. Have a nice day.